is the third talk today, and I'm going to talk about NullSafety in Flutter2 specifically. Just for the video, I'll introduce myself again. My name is Sylvia Dieckmann. I am a GDG organizer here in Cape Town. I'm also at times an engineering manager or a developer. I've been playing with new technologies and have been playing with Flutter for about a year. And I talk a little bit more later today about kind of what I've been playing with. Why can I not switch? Okay. So Flutter2 was launched officially in last month in March at Flutter Engage, a big event, and it came with a new cool feature with NullSafety. NullSafety is not specific to Flutter, being introduced in Dart, the underlying programming language, in version 2.12. It's also not specific to the way it was introduced now is so that you, as a developer, you can adopt NullSafety very incrementally until you eventually, sorry, you're seeing my Slack messages here. This is not cool. Let me kill Slack. All right, I think you're still there. All right, so you can opt into NullSafety incrementally until you finally reach sound NullSafety, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that entails. What NullSafety really gives you at a high level is the opportunity to turn runtime null errors, where you dereference a value that you expected to be a value but it's null, into edit time or compile time static analysis errors. So for a developer, that is huge. You don't have any more surprises in production, or at least less. Instead, you know at programming time where you're wrong. If you have, so that's NullSafety in general. If you have fully, if you're fully sound null safe, that means your entire application has been converted to NullSafety, then the compiler can also apply additional optimizations, so you're ending up with a smaller binary and with a faster binary. So in general, this is a good thing, and you definitely want it. But you should keep in mind in this talk and during your own migration journey, the goal is not to eliminate null from your code. Null is a useful thing. It carries a lot of information. So don't try to eliminate it wherever you can. Just be more conscious about where you expect null to be valid and where not, and basically make your code safer by being more disciplined when you write code. All right. If you heard any of my talks recently, you might know that I spent my COVID lockdown playing with a Flutter app, writing a little Flutter app. It's a very silly thing. It's kind of a bit of a game idea. Novelty game, I can't even call it game. It is really silly. You get presented as a player with a bunch of images, and you can flick them away until you get, it's kind of a hot or not, until you get to the last one, and then you supposedly have selected your dream Christmas tree. There's a good reason why it's Christmas trees, but I won't go into this now. Ask me offline if you care. Writing the app was a lot of fun, but after I launched it and after I sent the link to the first few friends and family, very quickly we ended up with this screen. So here I have two images, but one of them is clearly not performing, and it became very obvious what happened. This is the offending code. It's an image that I wanted to overlay the author handle. I want to allow users to upload their own images, but for safety reasons, I insist that they have been authenticated first, and I grab their author ID and name and save that together with the image, and wanted to display that. And so because of this design choice, I assumed that every image always has an author handle. But then I started testing and playing and trying, long names and short names and going into the server and editing the raw data. And eventually I made a mistake and one of the images ended without an author handle. And that's what broke everything. And this type of error is really what we're talking about here. It's kind of all of a sudden you get a null value where you don't expect it and you treat it as if it was a proper value. So text expects a string and cannot deal with a null. So if you have null safety, what does that mean? There upfront a few very basic language principles that get used to very quickly. One of them is that as of Dart version 2.12, variables are always non-nullable by default. And that's a decision the Dart team made. They could have gone the other way around, but basically they decided this is the default. If you want to indicate that a variable can contain a null value, like in my case here, variable bar, you have to add a question mark. If you have a value that is declared as a nullable value, but you know as a developer that in this place, in this situation, it can never be null, you have the option of making it a non-null by adding a null assertion operator, the exclamation mark, which I do here in the last line. So I'm assigning I have a non-nullable variable foo, and I'm assigning a variable that could potentially be null, but I know for a fact it's not null, so I can add the exclamation mark to make this assignment work. Now, what you should keep in mind, though, is that's an assertion here. That's an assumption that you as a programmer make. The compiler or the static analyzer cannot verify this, and you are at your own mercy here. If you make a mistake, you will end up with a runtime error, a type error, just like we had before. So use these assertions if you have to, but don't be too frivolous with them. And there are a few more things about null safety, but it's, a lot of it is along the same lines, like the same principle of adding question marks to indicate potential null values can be applied to generics, like here, a list of string, which is a very different thing than a list of nullable strings, which can contain a null value. You have NullAware Operators, which often can be super useful if you mix nullable and non-nullable variables and try to do assignments between one or the other. Another new keyword that I found extremely useful is the late keyword, because if you declare a variable as non-nullable, in theory, it needs to be initialized immediately, because otherwise, if you don't initialize it immediately, it would be null. Unless you add the late keyword, what you say in this case is, the variable will be initialized before it is read the first time, but it must not be initialized immediately. So in my case here, for example, I declare an object of this class, I initialize an object of this class, I set the property to value foo, and then I consume it. So this is safe. If I had swapped the last two lines, it would not be safe, and it would not compile. There are a few more cases and interesting scenarios, and especially some funny implications on the type system. For that, I don't have time to go into here. For the complete details, I really recommend the article Understanding Null Safety. If you go to the official Flutter documentation, they have a section on migration, and they kind of explain in a page or two what it is and what you need to do. And then they have a few links to this article, like if you want to read more. And I can really, really, really recommend it. It's a very long article, but it's super well written, easy to read. And it clarified every question for me. Whenever in my migration journey, I came across a funny, like, oh, I wonder why this cast is necessary here. This explained it. So do yourself a favor and read through this. All right, so at this point, hopefully you are convinced that null safety is a good thing and you want it. Now, how do you get there? If you're a new Flutter developer and you start now, it is easy. By just following the documentation, you'll install Flutter2. If you create your first skeleton app by calling .create, you'll end up basically with everything ready. With one tiny little caveat. The last time I looked at it, the Flutter team has not converted all the templates yet. So if you run .create, in the output it tells you, yada, 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 now run .migrate. And once you do that, .migrate changes another 3 lines in your skeleton code. And from there on, you have sound NullSafety. You're completely converted to NullSafety. You can always check what you have by looking at the pub spec. And what you see here is the line that specifies which Dart SDK to use. If it's 2.12 and above, you're using the new system. If it's below, it used to be, I think, 2.7, then you're still on the old system. So this is kind of a new app starting now. You don't need to think about any migration. You're more or less automatically migrated. If you, however, have existing code like I had with my tree finder app, things get a bit different, and you need to do some work to migrate. And the good news, though, is that they provide a tool that works really well. And I'm going to quickly talk about the tool now, but I can't go into too much detail. Again, I recommend one of the sources. There is a really nice video by Leif Petersen. It was released as part of the Flutter Engage event in March. You find it on YouTube. It's called Let's Migrate This App to NullSafety, and it's about 30 minutes long or so. He takes a moderately complex app and completely migrates it in 2 different ways, explains the difference, explains all the corner cases that he manually dealt with, where he trusted the tool, where he didn't trust the tool. And I learned a lot from that video. Also, really, really recommend it. But okay, let's think about the journey I had to go through. The very first step is before you can migrate your code, you have to make sure all the libraries, all the dependencies have been migrated. And for that, the easiest way to find out about that is to run .pub outdated. If you forgot to do that, if you immediately start with .migrate, it will tell you, no, first you still have outdated dependencies. First run the other command, and then you're back in business. When I did that, I was in for a slightly rude awakening. And it turns out that pretty much every single one of my dependencies needed migration that I didn't expect. But what was less cool is that some of them went through significant upgrades. If you, for example, I think the worst was Flutter Facebook auth, where I was still on version 0.3, and they are now at 3.3. And in the journey from 0.3 to 3.3, they had quite a few breaking changes. It really forced me in the end to rewrite a significant part of my authentication code. And I was surprised. I think I brought this upon myself because I had released the app in October and then forgotten about it. And I had not expected so many drastic changes within half a year. But hey, that's what you get if you abandon an app for a few months. The good news, though, is that pretty much everything I needed had been migrated to NullSafety. So it was simply a matter of me going through the list and ticking off each one and upgrading to the newest version and making a few changes if they had introduced breaking changes. There is one package that I used that has not been migrated, and there's actually another one which already got removed by the time I made the screenshot. These two, turns out, I don't expect them to ever be migrated because I think it's like somebody threw out a widget once and then lost interest. It doesn't look like they're doing any work on it anymore. And when I thought about it, I realized that I actually really don't need these packages. I think that came from, those were pieces I used very early in my Flutter journey, where I was still very intimidated about like writing a new widget myself. I like to use somebody else's packages and thought they knew better. By now, I'm actually much better. This process dialog is a little dialog that pops up and says like image uploading, please wait. And I can do that myself now, so I don't need it anymore. So that was good news. All the important stuff has been migrated to NullSafety. The very few things that have not been migrated are so easy to replace that I wouldn't sweat it. So after all the dependencies are upgraded, you can start using the migration tool. It's super easy. You just call .migrate from the shell. It takes about maybe 30 seconds or so. It takes a little bit, not excessively long. And in the end, you get a URL that you can open in the browser. And that's the actual tool. So let me see if I should have a tab open here. There it is. So that's the tool. On the left side, you see all my classes. And you see a little badge with each of them. It shows kind of the amount of changes the migration tool suggests. In the middle, you see a piece of code. So in this case, I'm currently looking at PlayCard, which is like a longer version of the piece of code I showed you earlier that I had broken. On the right side, you see a bunch of changes, and you can click on each of them individually. You can see what is suggested, and you can see exact reasoning why this is suggested, and you can even make hints, add hints. At this point, it's important to understand the tool has not changed your code yet. All of this is still just a suggestion, nothing else. At any time now, you can go into the IDE, make changes. You just need to remember to rerun from sources the tool, make sure you do the migration analysis on an updated version, but you can go back and forth between the tool and your IDE all the time, and people do that. You can also now go by hand through it and add changes. You can't really edit in this tool. And you don't have an undo button, which turns out to be a major nuisance in my view. So what I did small increments and did a lot of Git commits in between to make sure I could roll back. It was easier sometimes to roll back than to figure out where I accidentally dropped an annotation that I wanted to remove again. But with that little caveat, it wasn't too bad. What you typically do now is let's look at this one example here. The tool suggests that in the PlayCard class, I have 5 changes that it wants to do. And if I look at it, it basically says all these variables should be nullable. And more or less I agree, except for one case. The ID, I think, should not be nullable, because just the way my app works is by the time you have a PlayCard to show, the object has come from a server and it has to have an ID. I can see no way of getting a valid record, importing a record from the server without an ID. So let's make this non-nullable. I can do that by adding a hint, which I did now. This is the first time now where the tool actually modifies my code, but it's only inserting an annotation, a comment. So it's just a hint so far. And I can, I can't remove this here at the moment. This is not a full-fledged editor, but I can go into the IDE easily, remove this hint again, say rerun with changes, and that's it. The others I want to keep. And I think that's it for this file. Now, there's one more thing. I can do this exercise for everything. I can go through all of them, inspect them, make sure I make my changes where I want, and then do the entire migration in once. And people do that, that's fine. The easier way, in my view, is to do it like small groups at a time. And all you need to do for that, in fact, I think I first need to do rerun with changes, because I made a change to the code by adding my annotation. Again, this analysis is complex, takes a while, but it's not excessive. I mean, you do this for a few hours and then you're done. Okay, nothing much has changed in this file. I have my one annotation here. This will be non-nullable. Everything else is nullable. That's how I want it. So let's apply this now. For that, and I only want to modify this one single file, which is this one. So if I didn't make a mistake, I now have a single file selected for migration. Everything else stays the same. And then I say apply migration. It says some warning, which I accept. So at this point, if you look in the IDE at the source code, you will see this comment in here. And once I press OK, this comment will disappear and this file will have been migrated. And I think from now on, I think this view is not updated again, so I might as well close that. But let's go back to my slides now. Because the one thing it's a little bit tricky to show, so I just told you about it, because this was the very first migration iteration that I did, the very first step. In the first step, something big happens. Even though I only updated a single file, if you'd now do a git status, you'd see that every single file has been touched. And the reason is this. In the first migration, my Dart framework my Dart SDK gets lifted from 2.8 to 2.12. So at this point now, I'm running the new Dart system with the new with the new NullSafety requirements. Now that's a problem because I only changed the syntax for one little file. And what about all the others? Well, that's easy. All the other files get an annotation at the top of the file that basically downgrades them again to Dart 2.9. So, and this is the awesome part if you do incremental migration now. From now on, you can go through it file by file or package by package and basically track down all the files that have this annotation still in and remove that and adjust it, modify your code accordingly. And I found that this incremental approach worked really well. Because one thing I realized is that quite often it's not just a matter of accepting a question mark or so. There's opportunity for huge restructuring. Let me see if I find one example. It might not be available anymore. So this is the main Dart. Pity this won't work anymore because I already applied the migration, so this view is outdated. It would take a while to get to a different one now, so let's not go into this. But so one area where I got big gains was in my main file where I set up a bunch of routes. These routes sometimes get arguments to start with, and the tool made all these arguments nullable. I know as a programmer that I will not call a route if the tree object isn't even available. So I could make them all non-nullable, which had huge implications, simplified large parts of the rest of the code. So this is a good time to restructure, and this is why it really makes sense to do kind of small portions at a time and think a little bit about what you're doing and how you can improve the structure of your code. In general, my journey was fairly okay. I had a few hiccups. One of them bothered me a little bit. And that's big. I'm using, and that's just my choice and my convenience, I'm using an Android Studio plugin for internationalization. This plugin automatically generates a new internationalized files from the ARB files every time I make a change to a translation or so. And this plugin, because it generates code, at some point needs to generate new code that complies with Dart.12. And in theory, that works. In reality, I had some trouble convincing the tool to start generating new code. And it took a few Flutter clean, closing the browser, opening the browser again, Flutter clean again. Eventually it worked, and I'm not sure what combination of get out of the car, get into the car worked really. But there was a bit of a scary moment that I tried it again today to reproduce and couldn't. But yeah, I think if you get into trouble, delete generated code and do a Flutter clean and then see if on the next run, now with the correct Dart version, better code gets generated. Another thing that I had to realize after a while is that while the migration tool works really well, it's not perfect. There are some cases, there are some cases where it misses the need for explicit casts, and this has to do with the new, with kind of the new type system, the new structure of the type system. You need a lot more casts in your code, and one of them was Firestore data retrieval. So Firestore is typically, if you retrieve any data from Firestore, it's done by an asynchronous call. You typically get an observable object back, and then you observe it for snapshots, and you inspect these snapshots and pull the data out. And there are a million little recipes on the internet where, you know, lots of people have blog posts. It's like, oh, you just do this and it works, and it worked for me fine. And after the migration, all of these pieces were flagged because they needed an explicit cast now. It's like once I figured it out, it wasn't too hard, but I can imagine that if for a newbie, this can be a little troublesome for the next few weeks or month until more people have updated their documentation. As I said before, I think you are best served with migration if you use the opportunity to also refactor a little bit. And you should pay very, very close attention, and preferably at each migration step, to the static analyzer. You can either run .analyze, or I have Android Studio, I just have my window open. In each step, the analyzer came up with a lot of new recommendations, and also found a few errors in the new code that had been generated by the migration tool. Most of these, like for example, the missing cast in the Firestore data retrieval. All of these were easy to figure out and easy to address, but yeah, if you miss, you just need to pay attention to it. And yeah, that is it. Question from me immediately. So basically, when I started migrating my code, it was immediately with this like, wow, this is so cool. I wonder if it's really so cool. I want to kind of report on my experience and want to make a talk out of this. So I thought a lot more about each step and documenting each step. It took me quite a while, but overall, I think it's really easy to migrate existing code. It's probably nothing I would recommend kind of on a Friday afternoon as the last thing before you head in the weekend, but it's definitely doable. It's absolutely doable if you have good test coverage, which I did not have. I did run into a few runtime errors after migration that I found by accident, and that, you know, if I now use some of Remy's new techniques, might have found with testing where I didn't. And I did realize that just migrating code to NullSafety doesn't make it better by itself. I think the benefit really comes afterwards, working with it and being more conscious as you write the next feature at the next widget, about kind of being more conscious about where you can have null, where you need to protect against potential null value, and what you want to do in one case or the other. So I think at this point, having an app that's migrated does not make it a better app, but in the next rewrite, it will get better. And I'm absolutely intending to use NullSafety from here on. So that is it from me. I just, here are some of the resources I mentioned. So I'll just leave this on for a few seconds in case you want to take a screenshot. And that's it. I would like to call on Maya now, and I'm also to help me with the moderation, and I'm also calling on the other presenters now. Hello, Maya.
Thank you, Sylvia. That was great. It's always good to hear some horror stories from the trenches, so that you know what to avoid.
I hope it wasn't too horrible. I was trying to say that it wasn't actually as horrible as I expected.
It was a good battle for NullSafety, right?
Yeah.
Okay. We have one question in the Q&A. Let me see if there are more questions in the Q&A. There was one question in the Q&A.